Hey Victory Life staff, today we're going to cover our credit card policy and go over the things that you need to know as a card holder. So before we get started, you should have received an email that contained a copy of the full credit card policy, a travel meals policy, and a cardholder checkout procedures. If you did not receive that, please pause the video and go find those documents. If you don't have them, you can always email me at cody.maynard@victorylifechurch.com and I can send you a copy. So to start off, we're going to cover two main areas. First, we're going to look at the overarching policies, so things like who can be issued a card, what can I use the card to purchase, purchases that are not allowed, can I pay contractors and cardholder responsibilities. Then we'll look at the procedures, and the procedures are really more of the how do I do some of these things. So we'll look through how do you request a card, how do we adjust credit limits, what do we need to know about expense reporting, including deadlines, documentation requirements, and late submissions. We'll also go over a new form called the travel notice and even cover a little bit about lost and stolen cards. So to get started, we'll look at number one, who can be issued a card, and this is going to be pretty simple going forward. This is going to be only for employees. So there will be no cards issued in the name of a volunteer. They must be issued as an employee. So if you have high-level volunteers at your location that need a credit card, they're going to have to either use one of your location checkout cards or you will have to let them use yours. Now I'll go over a little bit later what is the responsibility of the cardholder when lending a card out. But for now, just need to know that employees are the only ones allowed to carry cards on them. Secondly, what kind of things can I purchase? Well, pretty big picture is cards can be used for any qualified business purchases. And so sometimes the easiest way to understand that is we're going to go to point number 3 and talk about the things you cannot purchase. So the things that you cannot purchase would be things like alcoholic beverages, tobacco, or controlled substances, as well as personal or family member purchases or loans. So, personal purchase is anything that's not for the ministry. It's for your own use or your own family's use. So that's the main two easiest areas to determine, did I make a qualified business purpose? If you can look at it and say that I was buying it on behalf of the church for the church's use, your general answer is yes, you made a qualified purchase. Now the last item on the list is just any other items that are inconsistent with the ministry's values. And if you're uncertain if a purchase might fall in this category, please reach out to your approver and discuss it with them and they can help you to make that determination. Now next up, one of the questions we get often is, can I pay contractors with my credit card? The answer is yes, absolutely. And I actually encourage that you do so. There's actually less paperwork needed if you pay a contractor with a credit card. Now I didn't say there's no paperwork, but there is less. So the paperwork you still have to get is if the contractor is going to work on our property, then you have to make sure we have a workers' comp certificate on file for them, or depending on what state you're in, that they have filed the proper documentation to be exempted from carrying workers' compensation insurance. So if they can provide you with either of those, then you can pay them with the credit card and they can work on our property. Now, last major policy area is what is my responsibility as a card holder. So as a card holder, you're going to agree, number one, just to conform to the terms of this policy and that we will hold you responsible for any misuse of a credit card. So things that looked like earlier I mentioned what happens if you give your credit card out to a volunteer. Important note is that you agreed to abide by these policies. A volunteer did not. So if a card is misused and it was done in the hands of a volunteer, it is still your personal responsibility as the card holder. That also goes for purchases that were not qualified purchases. So it was a personal expense, or it was something you did not discuss with your approver and they did not approve of the purchase. So any items like that, those could be potential areas where you would have to reimburse the ministry for misuse of a credit card. So please be very careful when making purchases and when lending your cards out to others to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen. So now that we've kind of gone over some of the main policies, we're going to look at requesting a credit card. So the main way to do that is to go to the support site of Victory Life Church. So you can find that at support.vl.church. And then there is an accounting request section, and you can use the form selector to pick the credit card request form. Now, I'm going to jump over there real quick and show you what that looks like on the screen browser and show you how to get there, and then we're going to come back to the presentation. Once you reach the support site, you'll see an area that says accounting request. If you click here, it'll navigate you down to the accounting request section, and you should see an area that says select a form. Now you can use the form selector at this point to look at the forms available, such as credit card request, new vendor request, and the credit card adjustment for changing limits. Now in this example, we're going to look at your credit card request, and you can click on that and it'll take you to the form. So once you reach the form, you can fill in the applicable information, and then your request will be submitted to accounting for approval. Okay, so now that we've looked at how to submit a form on the Victory Life Church support site, let's go ahead and also look at how to adjust credit limits. So if you're issued a card and you find that your credit limit is either too low for purchases you need to make on a temporary basis, so maybe Jubilee's coming up and you need to make large purchases, or you find that consistently you're bumping your credit limit, that's where a credit limit adjustment needs to be done. To do that, number one, you need to know that your approver needs to request it for you. You do not request it for yourself. And for the approver to do so, they will go again to the support site. They'll go back to the accounting request section, and they will select the form called Credit Card Limit Adjustment Request. And that will be very similar to the form they just filled out to request a card. This will just let them request an adjustment to your credit limit. Next up, major concepts you need to know. When you are issued a credit card, you're responsible to file an expense report every single month. So expense reports are due on the 5th of each month, and the important thing is if the 5th falls on the weekend, then the report is due at 9 a.m. the next business day. Now I know many of you work Sundays, some of you even work Saturdays depending on your locations, and the way we are defining the weekend is again the traditional way of Saturday and Sunday. So if the 5th is on a Saturday or Sunday, then the report is due on the next business day, which is generally Monday, but if there's a holiday, it would fall to that next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Now, if you do not submit your own reports, this is kind of a new change. You also need to know that all documentation must be turned into your submitter by the last day of the month. So whether that's the 30th or 31st, it's your job as a submitter to turn all documents, receipts, forms completed to them by the last day of the month. Now, I do realize that February is a short month, and so your responsibility is to get that to them on the 1st of March. Now, some other things to note on expense reporting deadlines is that your expense reports must balance with your credit card statement balance. So when you turn them in on the 5th, if they don't balance, it would be considered a late submission. Other things to note is that, again, that deadline is the 5th, and you need to turn it in either by emailing it to accounts.payable@victorylifechurch.com or by turning it in as a paper document in the accounting office here in Durant, Oklahoma. Now, obviously, if you're not in this area, the only valid method you can use right now is email. And then lastly, just again to note, any reporting not meeting the above will be considered a late submission. So again, if you didn't turn it in by the 5th, or your statement did not balance with your expense report, those items will be considered a late submission. Let's talk real quick about documentation requirements. So this is what's going to be required of you as a cardholder to turn in for every purchase you make. So we'll start off just and talk about quickly about a detailed receipt. So every purchase you make needs to have a detailed receipt attached with it. So a detailed receipt would be a receipt that shows a full list of all the items purchased and the quantity and dollar amounts of those items. Now we'll take it a step further if we go to have a meal receipt. So whether you're traveling or you've taken someone out for lunch as an entertainment meal, a meal receipt still has to have all the criteria of a detailed receipt, but it also needs to have the names of the people who ate, and if it was entertainment, the business purpose of that meal, or if it was travel, listing where you traveled to. So You can write that on the receipt, or you can fill that into the comment lines of your expense reports, but all that detail is required. Now, in the event that you have lost a receipt, please know that you can always fill out a missing receipt form for any purchase under $75. And please note that $75 limit, that is an IRS requirement. So if you do not have a receipt and the expense was more than $75, the IRS requires us to pick that up as taxable income to you personally. So that means you either have to reimburse the ministry for it, or we have to run it through your payroll. So please be very, very careful with your receipts. We do not like to ever have to enforce that rule, so please make sure you don't lose those. Now, also important to note that more than 2 missing receipts in a single expense report will trigger a late submission. All right, also let's talk about returned items. So very commonly as we purchase things, we will have to take some things back and return them. So anytime you return an item to the store, money should be returned back to the credit card that made the purchase. Do not take cash from the store or a gift card. Please take the card that you used to buy it, and they can swipe it and refund the money straight to your credit card. And then you'll get a receipt back from them showing the return that you can also turn in when you do your credit card statement for the month. Now lastly, also want to point out about sales tax. We as a ministry are exempted from sales tax, and so as a card holder, it's a requirement for you to do your very, very best to make sure all purchases you make are exempted from sales tax. So sales tax, number one, shouldn't be paid on any purchases, but if you have a vendor that either rejects our exemption, or very commonly like restaurants won't even bother to accept them, period, you should not spend more than $100 on any of those purchases. So any purchase over $100 with sales tax is going to be in violation of our policy. If it's under $100, it can be permitted, but it still is, we need to do our best to make sure that we use our sales tax exemption and save the ministry as much money as we can. All right, late submissions. So I've mentioned a few spots, some things that trigger late submission. I wanted to summarize it for you here. So number one, if an expense report is late, you as a cardholder will be placed on probation. Now, probation is a new concept, and it's going to be something we're going to define in just a second. I'm going to go through the criteria of the different phases of it. But the things that can trigger a late submission are the following: a report being turned in after the deadline, so that'd generally be on the 5th. Any documentation that was not properly submitted. So if you did not put the details of who ate on a meal, that would qualify as not properly submitted documentation. And number 3, if you have more than 2 missing receipt forms in 1 month, that would also trigger it as being a late submission and place you in probation status. So let's go through kind of what does probation look like. So you can think of an initial being placed on probation as a warning. So if you've been doing good, you've been turning in all your documentation, your receipts, you're in normal status. On your first missed statement, so it's late, improper documentation, you're going to be placed on probation, and that probation period is a 6-month probation, and you can think of that as a warning period. So during that 6 months, if you have no other late submissions, then you'll be released from probation and go back on about your business. However, if during that 6-month probation you trigger another late submission status, that will be considered your first offense inside of probation. So if you trigger off a first offense in your 6-month probation, a few things are going to happen. First, accounting, we are required to notify your approver that you were late again. Your approver is going to get with you, and they're going to request that you return your credit card to them. So any purchases you need to make going forward, you will have to contact your approver and ask to use your card. They will check it out to you. You can make your purchase, and then you have to return your card and the receipt from your purchase back to your approver. Then at the end of the month, they're going to help you file your expense report and ensure that it's turned in on time. Now, if during that 6-month probation you've already had a first offense, what that'll do, again, when that first offense will start your 6 months back over. You're going to lose your credit card privileges for 1 month, and then for the remaining 5 months, you'll get your card back and still be on probation. But if during that time period you get a second offense and you are late again, your card privileges are going to be revoked for 3 months, and you're going to get placed into a 1-year probation period. So the 1-year probation period looks just like the others. Your card's turned into your approver. You have to ask for them to let you use your card. However, if you have another late submission on your 1-year probation, your card privileges will be revoked indefinitely. So we hope that nobody ever reaches that point. You technically have 2 to 3 mess ups before you ever get there. So your first mistake could be while you're in good status and it puts you in probation. You can then have that first offense, which starts your 6-month probation over, and you lose your card for a month. Then you can have a second offense, which puts you into the 1-year probation period. So those give you 3 chances. If you go through all 3 of those and make your 4th offense, that's where your card is revoked. So be very intentional with your card. We don't want to have that happen to anybody. So please make sure everything's turned in on time and documented properly. All right, enough about cardholder probation. Let's kind of look a little more detail on those revoked card procedures. So while the card is revoked, the cardholder must follow the credit card checkout procedures, which was attached to the email that was sent to you. So make sure you have the full details you can read through there. But just in summary, your card should be turned into your approver. If your approver is not on your campus, that is going to be one of those situations where you will need to get with your approver and discuss how they want to handle your card while you're on probation. Now, again, you must, as a cardholder, request each time you want to make a purchase, and you are still responsible to submit a timely expense report while card privileges are revoked. All right, now let's also talk about lost or stolen credit cards, because this also happens frequently and we want to minimize this as much as possible. And in order to help do that, we have launched a new form called a travel notice, which again, this can be found on the support.vl.church website. Under the accounting section, there's a travel notice that you can submit. Now, as a cardholder, if you're going to go on overnight travel, you're going to be required to complete a travel request notice. Now, this notice is going to do a few things. It's going to help notify accounting where you're traveling to and the dates. And by doing that, we can contact the credit card company, let them know you'll be traveling. And this will help, number one, keep your card from getting locked out on accident while you're traveling. And number two, if it's lost or stolen, we know what areas you're supposed to be in. So if we see transactions outside of those areas, it can get the card flagged for theft. Now, also, the travel notice will have a few other things in there as well. Some areas letting us know if you need a vehicle rental or if you need any other approvals. Those will be on the form. So be intentional to fill that out a few weeks before you go on a trip so that we can get all the documents needed and get your card flagged appropriately. Now, if your card is lost or stolen, there's a few things you need to do. Number one, as soon as you figure out your card has been compromised or stolen, contact accounts payable immediately by phone or by email. Now, if you can't get a hold of them by phone, please email them. And even if you do call, we will still ask that you write up an email statement to us documenting what happened. So letting us know when it was lost, what transactions you saw, give us all the details, and we will file a report with the credit card company to mark it as fraud and to get that money reimbursed back to the ministry. All right, records management. So while having a card, you obviously will be making many purchases and having lots of receipts. Now, accounting, we are going to be responsible to keep your receipts for the required time period of 7 years. So as you turn in your expense reports, we will keep those records and we'll keep them on hand here. It will be your responsibility to keep a copy of those records for 1 month after they're turned into accounting. After the 1 month time period, you may dispose of those records and know that we are keeping the permanent records as required by law. All right, and lastly, the ministry cardholder agreement. So at the very end of your policy, there's the very last page, and this is a page that you have to sign as a cardholder in order to carry a card. And to sum up that page, there's basically 3 things that you're doing. Number one, You're going to acknowledge that you have read the credit card policy and that you understand it. Number two, that you assume personal financial responsibility for improper purchases. And what that means to you, that personal responsibility means if an improper purchase happens, that you are either going to reimburse the ministry for it or it's going to be run through your paycheck. And then number three, you're stating that you will be responsible to turn in timely expense reports. And if you do not, that you're agreeing to the accountability plan of the probation period. All right, and that sums up the bulk of the content for our credit card policy. I want to say thank you for tuning in and watching. I encourage you to read your policy in detail. And if you have any questions, you can, of course, always reach out to me, extension 38271, or you can email me at cody.maynard@victorylifechurch.com. We look forward to working with you, and thank you for watching today.